Some 20 years ago now, before I did my MBA, I had been looking into options for a more thesis-based master's. And I can't for the life of me remember how this happened, but the topic of Islamic finance rose to the top of the list of options. It had probably been suggested by the professor I spoke to at the university, or maybe I heard it being spoken about often enough around the bank to think that it would provide a route to global job opportunities. Now, I still love global job opportunities as an aside, but whatever the case may be, at the time I was too focused on the trees of loan mechanics to see the woods of product design. And I dismissed the topic as surely just a normal loan with fees instead of interest. And so I pursued it no more. And in so doing, not only did I miss out on an opportunity to be an early user of some really interesting product designs, but as it turns out, I missed out on the chance to get in early on what is now a $6 trillion industry. Supported by a culture of design thinking and a 35-year legacy across all aspects of finance, luckily my guests today made no such mistake. Rajesh Saxena, CEO at Intellect Design Arena, and Rami Rukos, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you.
We got a lot of interesting content to get through today, but I do always like to set the scene a bit. So I want to start with you, Rajesh. Looking at your LinkedIn, it's kind of a who's who of the big global names, Unilever, Citibank, American Express. Talk to me about that early career. Kind of what was your focus in those days? What were you learning? And are there any lessons or experiences that you learned in those big names that you bring with you into this much more fluid, faster moving area of the world that you operate in now?
Sure. Thanks, Brendan. So I think, as you rightly said, I started I'm an engineer, and after doing my MBA, I started my career with Unilever Group of companies in India as a consumer marketing professional. At that particular point of time, this is beginning of 1990s, Citibank India was setting up their retail franchise. And interestingly, they were looking for consumer marketing professionals rather than bankers to join them because they were setting the retail finance industry as a category in India. So I joined a group of about 20 people, which were responsible for setting up the Citi cards business in India. And in fact, not only the business for Citi, but in a way, we set up the category in this country. I spent 20 years with Citi in multiple geographies, India, UAE, Israel, Turkey, and lastly, Japan. And in the last 7 or 8 years of my career, I was running large product P&Ls, country P&Ls.
I don't want to take you too far off track here, but one of the things I remember about sort of rolling out credit cards in India, and this would have been a decade after you, I guess, laid the foundations, but it was a lot about distribution because every city was different and we had to go city by city, and then there's only certain cities in certain regions. It was a very complicated country to roll something out in. And I suppose that Unilever experience, that's what Unilever's great at, getting a little bottle of shampoo into any village anywhere in the world. I'd never thought about it quite that way before, but it makes sense that when Citi were trying to solve that problem early on, they said maybe we need people to understand how to get it out there.
Just to give you a very specific example to your point, Brendan, Citi in India at that time was a regulated entity, and we had only 6 branches in 4 cities. But we wanted to do business in 20 cities initially, right? So how do you go and do business in these 20 cities where you don't have a branch? So that is where a lot of innovation is what Citi brought to this market. So I think a lot of innovation came when you are constrained, right, from a regulatory perspective. But how do you turn that constraint into actually an opportunity? And till date, if you see in India market, all that has been started by Citi, in 1990s.
20 plus years with these blue chip names, the sort of brands that Warren Buffett invests in. You then decided to move across to Intellect Design Arena. And I'm interested in that because obviously you'd achieved a huge amount of success in corporate life. You're kind of on a path that's comfortable and pretty predictable, and you moved across to something that's far more risky and no doubt far more sort of chaotic in those early days at least. But talk to me about what you saw that said, okay, this is what I want to do next.
I'd always worked with a multinational company. So there was always that interest to work with a true global multinational, but which comes out of India. And I was always on the buy side. I wanted to see now how I could move on the sell side. So I think a couple of these factors, and also, as you grow higher, especially in these multinational organizations, most of the time that you were doing you were coordinating with regional headquarters or a global headquarters. I really wanted to create an IP, and this seemed to be a great opportunity for me to really all that I had learned over the last 23, 24 years in these organizations, how can I use those learnings to help an Indian company to become a truly global multinational? That was the key driver,
Yeah.
right?
And we're going to deep dive a few things, including specifically the work you're doing with Islamic finance. But maybe just at the highest level then, for those that aren't familiar with the name, talk to us a little bit about what Intellect Design Arena is.
So I would really like you to look at Intellect as let's say, a $350 million revenue fintech startup, right? So it has the financial stability, right? We are growing at about 16%. And we are profitable, debt free. But the real culture in this company is a startup mentality. It's about learning, it's about design thinking, and it's really about understanding customer problems and finding solutions to those customer problems globally. How can technology help our customers, who are banks and financial institutions in this case? How can we use technology to solve their problem? We do have 500 plus customers today across the globe. And if you really look at our client reference list, we have the global tier one clients like HSBC, Barclays, Lloyds, JP Morgan Chase, etc. We have large regional banks, and we also have important local players. So we really play in the entire financial space. And interestingly, Intellect has been only in this space for the last 35 years. So we're very different from some of our other competitors.
Yeah, and obviously India has been at the forefront of this digitization race in many ways. So it's been a great place to be based. But yeah, too much that you do for us to cover today. But we're going to focus in large part on this new launch that you have with Islamic banking. So before I sort of steal the thunder, let me bring Rami in here. Rami Rukos, Vice President of Pre-Sales for Islamic Banking and Islamic Banking Products. Rami, again, let's set some context with a little bit of where you come from before joining Intellect.
Yes. So thanks, Brendan, for having us in this in this session. So I started my career, I will say, in Europe, specifically in France, where I started as a banker for a private bank between Paris and between Luxembourg. Then after a couple of years, I started my first engagement, I would say, with IT company, specifically banking software and core banking provider. It was between Europe and the Middle East. So I would say for the last 15 to 18 years, that was, I would say, my focus area in the IT with the technology providers, with the fintechs, till I recently joined Intellect as a vice president for Islamic banking to handle the product and as well the pre-sales activity. So for the last 15 to 18 years, my focus area, my domain, it was purely on Islamic banking to elevate and to have more a comprehensive product in the market and to be more competitive.
Yeah, and let's set the scene a bit in terms of what that market looks like, because I think for those of us in these Western markets, if we know anything about Islamic banking, it's that you're not allowed to charge interest, and that's probably about it. And it can leave you thinking well, what's so complicated? But having interviewed one or two people here, I've come to learn that there's a number of, more complexities than that, but interesting solutions that I want to get into. But first, I think the other thing people don't understand is quite how big and diverse this market is. We're not just talking about the heart of the Middle East where we might think of it, but actually growing areas around the world. So how big is this Islamic market? Where are we seeing it? What sort of products are we talking about?
So if we look at the Islamic banking industry as a global market, so we can see like the industry during the last 50 years with the first Islamic bank in the world, which was Dubai Islamic Bank in 1975. So we can see like the industry has really like expanded the footprint to more than 100, I would say, and 40 countries by 2025. And if we look at the numbers of the Islamic banking industry, we are looking at the valuation of a market of around $6 trillion. We are seeing almost 21% of growth each year for the last 10 years in those 140 markets. So if I look specifically, Brandon, to the Islamic banking sector, which is the dominant, I would say, pillar of the Islamic finance industry globally, which represent more than 2/3 of the total assets of the $6 trillion, which I just mentioned to you, which is a very big number to, I would say, when it comes to the Islamic banking industry.
Yeah, and Rajesh, from a corporate point of view, obviously the number's a big number, and so that's always worth looking at when you're in business. But what was it about this problem with Islamic banking that you at Intellect said this is something we can actually solve and can solve at a global scale?
Sure. And I think it's a good question, Brendan. So I think I would really say that there were three pillars in which we looked at this pain. The first thing that we noticed in this market was time to market. As you know, in a competitive markets scenario, the banks need to be very quick to launch products and customize new products which following Sharia compliance. What we actually saw was, because the systems which were providing them the support was so legacy, they had to code for this, test for it, and the whole cycle for launching products was getting into months. So the time to market was a critical pillar as a pain that we saw. The second critical pillar that we saw was what I call as complexity and talent pool. What do I mean by complexity? So if you really look at managing pool, Islamic pool, in a conventional deposit, you pay interest, which is a fixed amount. But in case of Islamic, you have to actually calculate returns. And the returns are calculated based on the actual performance. And then you have to allocate these profits fairly across different pools, which can be very complicated. And this is an exercise which is mostly done till date by most of the banks in a manual manner.
I've never thought of it on the deposit side, being always in the lending industry, but yeah, that sort of complexity builds up fast, and yeah, especially when you hear people are manually calculating.
And especially some of the Islamic products like Murabba, Ijara, Mushraka, they are even more complex. So you really need experts, and the talent pool who understands Islamic is not really there. So, the complexity as well as the talent pool was the second pillar. And the third pillar, I think I briefly talked about, is the banks are having legacy systems. To be able to scale up, to compose new products is a problem. So we saw these three pain points, and we thought that because we have the latest architecture, which we call as emac.ai, we should be able to launch to address these pain points of the banks that we were seeing in these markets.
Yeah, and well, let's look at that, Rami. This emac service that you bring into the market, what's it doing? I guess what's it doing differently, and what is it? How's it designed to solve these problems that were just laid out there by Rajesh?
Very good question, Brandon. But before we jump into the emac.ai, I just want to add like a couple of points on the last question. So if we look a little bit on the difference between the conventional and the Islamic banking. So if I want to put them into three mainly differences. which can fall under the product layer. Second, it can be under the business layer. And the third one, which is a very important differentiator, which is the conceptual differentiator between any conventional business or any Islamic business. And this is what we have put in place when we started Islamic banking and Intellect. So conceptual, when it comes to Islamic banks, they are not a money direct lenders when it comes to lending. So the complete life cycle of financing, it's different. As a conceptual also, I think the Islamic banks, they cannot deal in any interest or non-permissible, I would say, industry, for example, in the banks. This is conceptual. Number two, when it comes to the business model as well, which is different from the foundation, Brandon, between the conventional and the Islamic. So I will give you an example. Like in the Islamic banking, you should have a Sharia board, you should have a Sharia committee, you should have any Sharia advisor. And this is where you need to gain the trust of whatever you are implementing, whatever you are offering as a solution when it comes to Islamic banking, if you are speaking about deposits or liability or on the lending side as well. And a third pillar, which is for sure important, which is the product level, whenever you implement any Islamic banking product. So this is also what Rajesh a little bit explained when it comes to lending side of the Islamic, like for example, the murabaha, the ijara, the musharaka, the tawarruk, or any other Islamic financing product. So the foundation is different, Brandon. And this is like the strengths when it comes to any technology company to put this in place in a one structured solution. And I would say Sharia compliant to make sure like you are offering the right solution to your customers. So I wanted just like to highlight those important pillars about like the Islamic banking as well.
I want to pick up on some of that later on because I think some of the transparency we're seeing now in any number of other banks that maybe want to target a niche of being like only investing in green technologies, only doing this or that. But in the short term, before we move on, just on those big Islamic banking categories, for people that are coming from a market where they know things like a mortgage, an auto loan, a personal loan, what are those big ones? And maybe we don't need to go through all of them, but explain a little bit how the structure of some of those products might differ from what would be familiar to people in Europe or North America.
Let's take one very simple example about one Islamic product, okay, which is very common use, I will say, in most of the markets, like in Europe as well, in GCC, in Africa, even in APAC, which is the murabaha financing product. So if I wanna map the murabaha financing product, it's like a cash loan or a transactional based loan, which you get in any conventional bank. So an Islamic concept, again, if I go back to my three pillars, Brandon, the product, the business, and the conceptual. So in Islamic banking, as an Islamic bank or an Islamic organization, you cannot grant or give cash directly to any customer. This is why the foundation of the model itself, it has to be based on underlying asset, which is asset-based or asset-backed transaction, if I want to define it like this for Islamic financing. And this is the biggest challenge for any bank on how to incorporate, I will say, this foundation, Brandon. And this is why the eMAG.ai architecture itself, which is completely event-driven, full microservice architecture, headless architecture as well, API, open platform finance, which has allowed us, if you want, internally as a team to come and to put this in place. Now, if I go back to the example, let's say I'm a customer and I want to buy a car in an Islamic bank. So the bank itself will go and they will purchase the car for me at a certain cost, plus they will add something called as a profit. In Islamic banking, it's all about also transparency, Brandon, which you have mentioned a little bit 2 minutes back. So if transparency is not there, it means your Islamic transaction is not ethical. It's not Sharia by law. And this is where you come back to your Sharia board and Sharia people inside the bank to tell you that you cannot commit this transaction. And to do that, you need a system. So the system has to be embedded inside, I would say, into those procedures, those transactions, those configuration, which will allow the bank to do any Sharia transaction as per, like, let's say, the Sharia. And this is why one of the main foundation of our Islamic banking, it is Sharia by design. So Sharia by design, it means whenever we started by development of this solution, the foundation, it was based on the Sharia guidelines, the principles, and the structure itself. This is why you need to balance, like you are buying, then you are selling the transaction or the car to the customer, which will make your, I would say, transaction as a fully Sharia.
I suppose it's been explained to me in the same thing's been explained to me before, but I've never quite seen it so simply as a kind of tripartite type agreement where, it's not the money that's coming, but the goods. And, it's a simple explanation, but it reveals the complexity in the system. So let's talk about this, the eMARK.ai that's coming out now. One, maybe right up front, let's talk about where people can go online to learn more about it. And then kind of what are its core features and what are you seeing the response in the market? But yeah, first, where do people go if they want to have a look and learn more about it?
Yeah, so I think we have a website where we have most of the information available, right? It is called www.intellectdesign.com. We also have a LinkedIn handle, which customers or prospects can look at it. And there are various ways by which they can talk to us, and we'll be more than happy to, revert back to them.
Yeah, and I'll put the links in the show notes as well. And I think we'll probably mention them again at the end because intellectdesign.com includes the full suite of your solutions and all sorts of insights in there. It's a website that people will want to spend a bit of time looking through, regardless of which project they're interested in. But yeah, I'll put those links below. It's easy to find for anyone who wants to do it. But yeah, this launch, this eMARK.ai, EMACH.ai. Talk to me a little bit about how that's going and kind of what it's doing for your customers.
Yeah, so I think a couple of quarters back, what we decided was that we wanted to re-architect all our platforms into eMARK.ai. So let me just briefly talk about eMARK.ai. Rami mentioned it. E stands for event, so it's an event-driven architecture. M stands for microservices, A for API first. It is a cloud native solution. C stands for cloud. H for headless. That means we are available to you as headless. And of course, AI stands for embedded AI into a product. So all our platforms are based on eMARK.ai. And what it really does is this is the latest generation of the technology, and this really helps the banks to be able to compose solutions rather than code solutions. We can now compose solutions, we can configure solutions, and they are very quick to launch, and we are able to bring multiple solutions together through APIs and events and real business impact AI embedded in our platforms and solve a customer problem. We are seeing huge traction. To your question, we are seeing a good traction in the market because we believe that we are really market leading in this space. Most of our competitors and peers are maybe cloud ready, but they have not reached the maturity that we have reached. So we have maybe a couple of years head start on most of our competitors. And that's really what we bring to the market.
Yeah, and I mean, obviously, anybody who's done anything close to core banking systems knows what a disaster it can be to want to change one of those legacy systems. But I mean, I've seen in your material, you'll be able to implement systems in 6 to 9 months.
That's right.
This is a very different world to the world we knew maybe 5-10 years ago. Of 6 to 9 years maybe was what we were familiar with in the past. But 6 to 9 months. Talk to me about what an implementation looks like if a customer approaches you and they want to get going, how hard is it for them to turn one of these systems on and to compose it in a way that fits their needs, and then to be live and serving products?
So I think it also depends on the banks, Brendan. So many banks, we work with the banks to say, do the banks want to go in an MVP type of an approach, or do they want to go in a big bang approach? Right. So it depends on this, whether it's a greenfield bank or there's a data migration involved where we have to extract data from a legacy system. So it depends on all these factors, right? How the bank decides. And that's a conversation we have with the bank, and then really advise to them saying, this is the best kind of a methodology for you where on what you want to achieve. But a typical if I look at a core banking transformation, which could be, which includes, let's say, deposits, payments, lending, treasury, etc., it could be it could be a 9 to 12 month full implementation, including data migration. A greenfield bank, which starts with let's take a digital bank, for example, right? We are now having in many markets digital bank licenses being issued, and these digital banks are greenfield banks with a simple MVP. Those we are able to go to live from 4 months to 6 months in an MVP approach. So the technology implementation cycle is drastically reduced. So depending on the type of bank and whether there's data migration, could be 4 months to 6 months. If it's a large scale core transformation, it would be 9 to 12 months. But that's the kind of play that we have.
Yeah. And Rami, maybe you can help with this one as well. But if I sort of wear my own biases on my sleeve for a minute, when I think about a sort of a finance system that's religiously compliant, I think, okay, it's going to be driven by regulations first. I think, okay, if something's driven by regulation first, it's not going to be particularly innovative. And without ever really looking at what was happening in the space, I've just assumed, okay, it's going to be fairly slow, it's going to be fairly driven by rules, and every decision is going to be dictated by books worth of rules and checklists. But clearly, this is not the case. We're seeing a lot of really interesting Islamic finance and fintech coming through, powered by solutions like your EMAC. What's happening in this world in terms of what these banks are doing with it?
So one of the important Sharia aspects of any, I would say, system, Brandon, is how you can comply with the regulatory specification and the Sharia regulatory as well, or the internal bank specification. And this is also one of the key differentiator which brings EMAC.ai in place. So the foundation of our Islamic banking solution, it is based on the IOFI Sharia and compliance, which is the international organization for the Sharia guidelines and the principle, and which is adopted, by the way, in more than 140 countries around the world, from Europe to GCC, APAC, and the Middle East. So once you have the foundation and embedded as a Sharia by design inside your system, it will become more easy to any bank in any market, especially, for example, if you are a digital bank, new established or a greenfield, to go. Once you have the foundation, any local regulation, any local customization, it will be flexible, it will be seamless, as Rajesh a little bit explained. So using like the headless integration, for example, with any central bank or any digital, let's say, platform from the outside, or any other ecosystem surrounded. So foundation, it has to be there for Islamic. Then you have the technology which has to support this, and then you have like the front end channels and all of this. And by the way, like if I want to speak about the UK market specifically, so many traction it's happening there as well on the Islamic finance and the Islamic industry. And we are seeing like most of, I would say, the commodity trading platform, they are based and they are like, I would say, serviced inside the UK. And what we are doing in Intellect Branding, this is, by the way, very, very interesting. So we are in concluding a partnership between Intellect and one of the biggest commodity trading platform in the UK, also, which can provide this seamless landing integration for any Islamic bank or any Islamic digital bank across not only UK as well GCC and the APAC market. And this is a very, by the way, interesting thing which is happening between the UK market and the banking industry.
In fact, to add to that, I was reading about the UK as an Islamic banking center, right? And I think one of the articles I was reading was that how UK has from a lagging to a leader in Islamic finance, right? And the way they are now, there are dollar denominated sukuk bonds, especially green bonds. The way UK is developing as an international Islamic market, that's really, they're really taking a leadership role in that.
It's clearly, well, not just a big market, but a dynamic one at the moment. And I think what you brought out there as well is a good reminder that this is not just a few simple products. This is across the financial industry. So we're not talking about, oh, we can build a better consumer loan or a different type of mortgage. Every aspect of banking is touched on this, up to things like commodities trading. The whole financial industry should be sitting up and thinking about it, both in terms of serving the 6 trillion market that's worth paying attention to because it's wants these Sharia products. But there's an even bigger market that probably wants the same sort of transparency and some of the same controls. I mean, we haven't spoken too much about it here, but one of the things that I appreciate the most about the Sharia loan design is if we take it beyond just simple transparency, but it's kind of ring-fenced in maximum costs of a loan. And if we think about everything in consumer lending in other markets, where we're at our worst, are these loans that you borrow $1,000 and something goes wrong and now you owe $100,000. I think that concept works in any products.
And one of the tailwinds that we are seeing, Brendan, is really this ethical finance appeal is actually appealing to non-Muslims also. And also in Islamic banking, speculative derivatives, which it avoids, right? And there are real underlying assets. These are helping. And this is what I would say that even Muslim investors are looking at these models. And these are some of the tailwinds we are saying as we talked about the 6 trillion market growing at about 21% CAGR.
It's a good time for people to have a look and see what's happening and why, and separate it maybe from any kind of regulatory side to say, is there a good product design in here? And obviously the roots of the company are in design thinking. And so I'm quite interested in your approach as well, because this is not come, and again, I'm showing some of my own biases, but this has not come from a point of view saying we have a religious mandate and we're going to build something because of that. But you have a design thinking that says, here's a problem, we can fix it. So talk to me a little bit about how the company thinks through these products in the early stages and these problems and says, we can build a fix for it. How do you incorporate this design thinking aspect?
Design thinking is something that we were one of the earliest adapters of design thinking, and this is something that we picked up from the Silicon Valley, right? Versus a New York, where New York, what we found was in Northeast, most of the people are trying to optimize, but design thinking is not really about optimizing. So what we did was we built a 30,000 design center where all our employees have to go through that. And we have multiple training programs to make sure that everybody understands. We bring our customers to design centers, to this design center, which is in a global headquarter in Chennai. But let me give you one specific example to make it come to life for you. So one of the design thinking principle we say is the last 2% is 200%. What we really mean is that, if you really look at a product and if you take products from multiple companies, 95% or the first 90% are common, right? Everybody will give you that. It's the last 2%. It's the last 2% of the way an iPhone has been designed, right? Which makes it different from other products. I think that is one of the principles that we use is what is that last 2%? And, even in today's conversation, we continuously talked about what are the customer pain points and how we can help them using our technology and our solutions, how we can solve them. This is how we inculcate design thinking in all our products, in all our employees, in all our processes. And of course, we would be happy to, if you ever come to Chennai in India, we would be happy to take you and walk you through this 30,000 square feet of design thinking center that we have.
No, I'd love to take you up on it. I went to IDEO in Silicon Valley 20 years ago on an MBA trip, and about 6 months ago, a year ago, I had somebody from the London office come in and talk to one of my classes. I said, 20 years later, I still remember going around their little office there and talking to their team. Nothing like the scale. I'm sure they're bigger now than they were then, but I'd love to see that in practice. And I think, it's probably simplifying it a bit too much to say so, but it's almost fundamentally the difference between finance and fintech, right? Like this thinking of like, we're a big bank, we do what you expect a big bank to do, and we do it well enough, and your money's safe, so don't worry about it. To wait a minute, like what is it you're actually trying to solve?
And how do you build customer adoption? How do you build customer intimacy? How do you build that customer happiness? I think design thinking comes from that rather than just selling a product, right? It's not that I sell your product. I really look at the last 2% and make sure that the customer, if I'm selling an agri solution to an HDFC bank, right? How do I make sure that if they have 35,000 RMs, right? How do they adopt this solution? How does it help them? So I think that's where design thinking comes in, and that's the philosophy of the company.
And it's actually really interesting off the back of this, because we spoke about early on the difference between building from the ground up versus adapting. And I think that is a very clear example, right? Like we're not just going to say, here's a solution we have off the shelf. We're going to knock one or two things onto it and we'll call it an Islamic banking solution. We're going to build an Islamic banking solution. And I maybe didn't sit long enough on that, because if I go to your website in intellectdesign.com and I click on your solutions tab, you've built a million things, right? You've built solutions for, well, all levels of banking, like wholesale banking, non-banking finance companies, consumer banking. It would have been very easy to take one of those tools, one of the consumer banking tools, and say, we're going to build this once and we're going to tweak it a little bit for a market that has branches and one that doesn't have branches. And we'll change a little bit if people use postal addresses still, or if people use phones. And we'll call it a day. Like we've got the scale, we can sell the same thing, or we can sell 95% of it over and over and over again because it's kind of the same. But you've actually gone and built products from the ground up to solve. So even more reason for people to really spend some time clicking around on that website, because it's not just one product, sold into different niches, but you've got a whole lot of different products for people to explore there, no matter which niche they're in. So
if I could just respond to that, Brendan. So if you really look at our name, so we call it Intellect Design Arena. The arena comes from there, right? We've been 35 plus years and we've been only doing banking for the last 35 years, and we built domain. And we believe that we have solutions for the retail banking, we have solutions for wholesale banking, wealth, and insurance. So that's our model. It's an arena model, rather so that we focus on whatever has been the banking needs. And the benefit to the bank is that once you implement one of the Intellect products, right, that to really put on top of it new products is very easy. That's the architecture piece that we have that I talked about, right? Rather than the bank having a vendor-centric view. So I have a solution for, let's say, lending. I have a solution from a different vendor for trade, from a supply chain finance. If you implement one of the Intellect products, then it's very easy to build this. And then you have a common customer master. You can have a full customer view. So there are huge advantages of bank being able to look at it as a customer-centric view rather than a product and a vendor-driven centric view.
Yeah, it really is. And we mentioned before, we use serving customers around the world. If a customer wants to start an engagement, which is the best way to do that? Is that via the website, or what is the best way for somebody in the Middle East or in Africa or in the US to start a conversation with you guys?
Yeah, so website is one of the ways. We also have offices and our salespeople in multiple locations. For example, in Europe, we have a large office in Canary Wharf. In UK, we have an office in Frankfurt. We have an office in Budapest. We have an office in Stockholm. So we have offices there. But so if you go on to our website, you will have a list of our offices, and you can talk to, or you can send an inquiry on our website, and we'll be happy to reach back to the customer.
Great. Well, thank you both so much for joining me. As I said, I think this is it's a huge market that's worth understanding for everybody, but so many unexpected lessons that we can apply kind of wherever we fit in there. So for everyone listening, I think there's something for them to learn by going to that intellectdesign.com website or the LinkedIn pages, which I'll link in there. Rajesh, I know that you travel around a lot as well. You were in London not too long ago, so people might catch you out and about as well. But thanks for making the time. I think it's a space where we're going to be seeing a lot of growth and a lot of innovation for many years to come. So really happy to have heard it sort of firsthand what's happening there. And yeah, best of luck for the product as it continues to be rolled out and implemented around the world.
Thank you.